Franklin died on a Thursday. By Monday, I realized I had married into a lie. The scent of lilies still clung to my hands. I'd touched every petal before they were lowered into the earth with him, carefully, like they might bruise. The funeral home had been cold, colder than I expected, and the choir sang that tired him I used to hum in the kitchen when life was quieter. People cried for the man they remembered. I stayed silent for the one I truly knew. He was laid out in a dark oak casket, the same shade as the desk in his study. It looked like him, sturdy, polished, closed. Kalen stood beside me, stiff in his pressed navy suit, pretending to mourn. His jaw clenched like he had to remember to look devastated. His hand never once touched mine. He didn't speak to me, not even when the minister asked if I wanted to say a few words. I did once. I wrote them the night before, but I'd burned the paper that morning. What could I have possibly said? That I met Franklin at an art gallery? That he spoke about sculptures like they were people, and I fell for it because I thought men like him didn't lie? That I gave up my design firm to become a wife and stepmother in his suburban palace, thinking love required sacrifice? No. I would have cracked my voice trying to make sense of it all. So I just stood there, numb, while Kalen kept throwing glances at his phone like he had somewhere better to be. His grief was too clean, too rehearsed. The people whispered that he took after his father, but I knew that wasn't true. If Franklin was complicated, layered, flawed, but Kalen was different. There was something off in his eyes, something cold. Later that night, I sat alone in the living room while guests drank wine and swapped condolences. Every now and then, someone came by to squeeze my shoulder or offer me another slice of pie. I just nodded. They talked about how lucky Franklin had been to have a woman like me, how much he loved me, how well I'd raised Kalen after his mother passed. Funny how people build stories for you when you're too exhausted to tell your own. Across the room, Kalen laughed at something one of his friends said. He was drinking from Franklin's favorite glass, the one with the engraved F. His tie was gone, sleeves rolled, and not a trace of red in his eyes. I watched him from the couch, the boy I had spent the last 7 years defending. He used to cry for hours when no one else was around. Franklin didn't know how to comfort him, so I did. I sat outside his door every night for months until he stopped waking up screaming. I thought we had something real, that he'd let me in, even if only slightly. Now he didn't look like a grieving son. He looked like someone who'd already moved on. I caught him watching me, just for a second. He smiled, not kindly, not sadly, just knowingly. And in that smile I felt something snap. It wasn't pain. It wasn't anger. It was a whisper inside me, something I hadn't heard in a long time, suspicion. I excused myself and went upstairs, my steps light on the polished wood. Franklin's study door was slightly ajar, even though I was sure I'd shut it before the funeral. When I pushed it open, nothing seemed out of place. His shelves were perfectly aligned, the blinds still drawn. But the drawer to the left of his desk, the one with the silver lock, was cracked open just enough to notice. I reached for it, then stopped. Downstairs, Kalen laughed again. Not like a boy who had lost a father, like someone who had just won. I didn't open the drawer. Not yet. I went back to my room, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the wall until morning. The next day, I called Franklin's lawyer, and that's when everything started to unravel. I used to have a studio downtown. High ceilings, paint-stained hardwood, the scent of fresh lumber and lavender from a candle I lit every morning. I'd wake up before the sun, coffee in hand, sketching ideas on tracing paper spread across my drafting table. Clients booked months in advance. I designed boutique hotels, coastal homes, even a yoga retreat in Napa. That life feels like a memory I borrowed from someone else. I met Franklin at an art opening. He stood next to a bronze sculpture of a woman holding her own shadow and told me, "That's grief, isn't it? Holding on to something that was never yours to begin with." His voice had gravity, warm, confident, broken in a way I mistook for depth. He listened when I talked. Not just nodded, listened. It was disarming. I didn't know yet that some people only listen so they can learn your weaknesses. Kaylin was 13 when I met him. Thin, pale, and always watching. Franklin warned me that he was distant, still grieving his mother. I tried to respect the silence between us. I didn't push. I waited. And when he finally spoke to me, just a good morning on my 3rd week in their house, I cried in the pantry where no one could see. By the time Franklin proposed, I'd already started packing up my studio. He didn't ask me to quit. I offered. It felt right. I was stepping into something bigger. A family, a home, a life that wasn't just about fabric samples and lighting fixtures. I moved into the mansion 2 weeks before the wedding. Everything gleamed, granite countertops, floor-to-ceiling windows, a staircase that felt stolen from a castle. But the air was still, museum-like, a house where no one laughed too loudly. I filled it with color, warm hues, plants, fresh bread. Franklin smiled more. Kaylin, not so much, but I didn't give up. I made his favorite breakfast on Mondays, tucked notes into his school lunches, left books outside his door with little sticky tabs pointing out parts one thought he'd love. He never thanked me, but he stopped locking his door at night. That felt like something. Franklin adored me, or so I thought. He kissed my forehead every time he left the room. He called me his calm. When his business trips ran long, he always FaceTimed from hotel beds with wrinkled shirts and sleepy eyes. Still, there were cracks. Tiny ones. Like when he forgot our anniversary one year and blamed it on work. Or when he dismissed my anxiety attacks as overthinking. He never yelled, never raised a hand, just quiet dismissals, polite condescension. Kaylin grew colder with age, polite always but detached. His grief never seemed to evolve. He didn't want comfort. He wanted distance, and I kept giving it, thinking one day he'd reach across the gap. We played happy for years. Dinners with wine and laughter, family trips to Aspen, neighbors who envied our lawn and our smiles. But there were moments when I'd catch Kaylin watching me with a look I couldn't place. Not anger, not affection, just calculation. Franklin never noticed. Or maybe he did and just didn't care. I told myself this was love, that I'd chosen right, that healing a broken family was messy, and I just had to keep showing up, keep being kind, keep being quiet when it hurt. But looking back, I wasn't healing anything. I was dissolving. Piece by piece, I had become invisible in my own home. Not all at once, but gradually, like steam escaping through a crack in the window. They made me think I was essential, and I was, just not in the way I believed. I was the glue, yes, but glue only matters until the picture is framed. Then they pretend it was never needed. The doorbell echoed downstairs. Sharp, jarring. I didn't move. I just stared at the wall and realized for the first time that maybe, just maybe, I had never belonged here at all. The law office smelled like lemon-scented wood polish and something older, like dust that had settled into the wallpaper. I sat between 2 chairs that felt too stiff, across from a lawyer who wouldn't meet my eyes. His name was Mr. Kellerman, and he had the nervous energy of someone who had just delivered bad news 100 times and still hadn't figured out how to make it feel softer. Kaylin sat to my left, ankles crossed, a smugness just barely tucked beneath his neutral expression. He wore Franklin's watch. Gold. Heavy. Too large for his thin wrist. I hadn't even noticed it missing from the bedside drawer. Mr. Kellerman cleared his throat and tapped the folder in front of him. Mrs. Ashcroft, thank you for coming. As you know, Franklin finalized this version of his will about 7 months ago. The changes were extensive. Changes? I smiled politely. Franklin always told me we'd go over it together. Kellerman blinked, adjusting his glasses. Yes, well, sometimes people change their minds. The first few minutes were exactly what I expected. Formalities, legal disclaimers. Then he began to read, and with each line, my stomach grew colder. To my beloved wife Heather, I leave instructions for her continued well-being. In the case of mental health relapse, the appointed guardian and medical professionals will oversee her daily care. I didn't hear the rest. The words blurred. My heartbeat surged in my ears. Mental health relapse? What relapse? I'm sorry, what does that mean? I said, the words pushing out of me like broken glass. What is he talking about? Mr. Kellerman hesitated, as if hoping someone else would interrupt. Kaylin leaned forward. Dad worried. Toward the end, you weren't doing well, he said softly, his tone rehearsed, like an actor in a courtroom drama. The night terrors, the forgetfulness, the screaming in the greenhouse. He looked at me like he was mourning me, like I'd already lost my grip on reality. I wanted to laugh, but nothing in me could find the breath. There were no screams, I whispered. Franklin recorded some of the episodes, he continued. He said he didn't want to embarrass you, but he had to protect what he'd built, what we built. Mr. Kellerman cleared his throat again, this time to cut the tension. The estate, assets, business holdings, and properties are transferred to Kaylin Ashcroft as sole heir. That includes the main residence, the company shares, and the trust funds. I couldn't feel my hands. I opened my mouth, closed it, then opened it again. This has to be a mistake. Franklin wouldn't do this to me. He loved me. I took care of him. I took care of both of you. Kaylin's expression didn't change. Not even a flicker of guilt. You did, he said, and we're grateful. But Dad needed to make sure you had the support you needed, that you didn't hurt yourself or others. I stared at him. You're lying. He shrugged, not cruelly worse. Indifferently. It's all on record. Mr. Kellerman looked between us, clearly uncomfortable. There are medical statements, Mrs. Ashcroft. Therapist evaluations, all signed and time-stamped. Everything appears legitimate, unless you want to contest it. My voice felt trapped in my throat. Everything slowed down, Mr. Kellerman shuffling papers, the antique clock ticking in the corner, Kaylin brushing invisible lint from his sleeve. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the precision. They had planned this. They had watched me, crafted a version of me I didn't recognize, a woman too fragile for independence, too broken to be trusted with the life I'd built beside Franklin. And now they were taking it all. I rose slowly from the chair, legs trembling. Kaylin didn't move. He just watched me as he always had, with that same unreadable calm. I met his eyes and held them. This wasn't grief anymore. It was war. The house felt different when I returned. Quieter, colder, like it had exhaled something vital the day Franklin died and never pulled breath back in. I dropped my purse by the door, ignored the trail of mail Kaylin had let pile up on the console, and went straight to the kitchen. I stood there, fingers curled around the marble counter edge, trying to steady my thoughts. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I was too stunned for that. Too hollow. Kaylin came in a few minutes later, so casual it made my teeth ache. He was eating an apple, walking slow, like he didn't have a care in the world. You're home early, he said, not even looking up from his phone. I turned to face him. You had something to do with this. He didn't even blink. With what? Don't play dumb. The will. The therapist letters. The claims about my mind. He finally met my gaze and smiled, small, sharp, a flicker of something cold beneath the charm. Heather, you haven't been yourself. You've been under so much stress. Losing Dad, it's no surprise you're overwhelmed. I'm not overwhelmed, I hissed. I'm not crazy. I never said you were, he said smoothly, walking past me to grab a bottle of water. But that's not really up to you to decide now, is it? It hit me then. He wasn't trying to argue. He didn't have to. The lie had already rooted deep, and now he was just letting it bloom. Why? I asked. My voice was tight. Why go this far? He took a sip, then leaned against the counter like we were old friends catching up. Because my father let you walk in here and take up space that was never yours. Because you played wife while I was still trying to figure out how to live without a mother. And because Franklin gave you everything. The house, the accounts, even a share of the company he promised would be mine. That's not true, I whispered. He wanted to build it with both of us. He wanted a family. He tilted his head. No, he wanted peace. You were just the easiest path to it. I stared at him, my breath slowing, my hands curling into fists at my sides. Then he smiled wider and added, You really should rest more, Heather. You're starting to look strained. I left before I said something I couldn't take back. Back in my room, I opened my drawer and stared at the pill bottles that had appeared 3 weeks ago, ones I didn't recognize labeled in my name. I'd assumed Franklin had filled them for my migraines, but they hadn't touched the pain. I had stopped taking them after the second day, forgetting them entirely. Now, I wondered what they really were, and more importantly, how they got there. Later that night, I walked down to the garage, determined to clear my head. I grabbed my spare keys from the hook where I always left them. Gone. I searched my bags, my coat pockets, the kitchen drawer. Nothing. 2 days later, Kaylin found them in the laundry room, under a pile of old towels. Maybe try keeping better track, he said, handing them to me with a patronizing chuckle. I didn't say a word. A few days after that, I found an email, one I had no memory of sending, thanking a therapist for our weekly sessions. The language was flowery, nothing like how I wrote. And the signature, he, instead of Heather. I'd never signed my name like that. It felt wrong. Off. But there it was, logged in my sent folder. Dated 2 months ago. It was all fake. Every detail. Every planted moment. And I had missed the signs. They were setting the stage while I was setting the table. I drove to Dr. Bessner's office on a Wednesday afternoon, my heart pounding the whole way. I hadn't seen her since Franklin's last hospital stay. She greeted me with a surprised smile, then confusion. I didn't expect to see you again so soon, she said kindly. How have you been? Soon, I said slowly. I haven't been here in over a year. Her brows furrowed. No, we haven't had a session since last October. I sat down, shaky. You didn't prescribe me anything? Or write any sort of mental health evaluations lately? She shook her head, puzzled. Of course not. Heather, what's going on? I opened my mouth to answer, but no words came out. All I could do was sit there, staring at the woman who, according to Kaylin and Franklin's revised version of reality, had been treating me weekly for emotional instability. My throat tightened. They hadn't just taken my home, my life, my marriage. They had taken me. Grief made me soft. But clarity cut like ice. After that session with Dr. Bessner, something inside me shifted. I stopped crying. I stopped shaking. I stopped asking why. The question was never why. It was how. And now I had just enough pieces to start tracing the lie to its bones. The next morning, I went into Franklin's study. I hadn't stepped foot in that room since the funeral. It still smelled like him, cedarwood and the faint burn of his old cigars. His leather chair sat turned toward the window, waiting for a man who'd never return. But I didn't come here to mourn. I came to search. I pulled out every drawer, flipped through every folder, ran my fingers beneath the edges of the desk, behind picture frames, inside hollowed-out books. For hours, nothing. Then I saw the corner of a panel behind the bottom drawer, barely a sliver of metal like a latch. I wedged my nail under it and popped it open. Inside was a slim USB taped to the wood, labeled in Franklin's handwriting, H. Legal, First Drafts. My heart stopped. I rushed upstairs, plugged it into my laptop, and waited. 3 folders. One was a revised draft of his will, dated 8 months before his death. My name was on everything. The house, the business shares, the trust in Kaylin's name managed by me. There were notes, too. Voice memos. Scraps of thoughts Franklin had dictated. Heather has done more for Kaylin than I ever could. I want her protected. Kalen is still grieving, and I don't trust the men he's begun associating with. Then another, dated 6 weeks later. His voice was raspier, hesitant. Kalen wants a new draft. Says Heather's unstable, he's being insistent. Too insistent. My stomach turned. He'd changed the will. Under pressure. And now he was dead. I didn't cry then. I didn't even blink. I just copied every file, backed it up to 3 drives, and emailed a copy to a name I hadn't typed in years. Declan Rourke. We hadn't spoken since Franklin's company sued Declan's firm for breach of contract, a suit Declan claimed was personal. But even then, he'd pulled me aside once, quietly, and said, "If you ever need someone who doesn't owe Franklin a damn thing, call me." I called. He answered on the second ring. "Heather, I need a lawyer who hates ghosts." Then you called the right man. Later that week, I met with Nakoa in the back of a rundown diner 2 towns over. She was sharp-eyed, barely smiled, and had a voice like gravel. She came highly recommended by a friend from my old design firm. "I don't want proof," I told her. "I want leverage." Her lip twitched. "You're not looking for justice." "I'm done hoping for justice. I want control." She nodded like she understood, then slid a form across the table. "Sign here. And don't lie to me." I signed. For the next few days, I disappeared. I didn't answer Kalen's calls. Didn't come down for dinner. I roamed the halls in my robe, muttering, laughing to myself sometimes just loud enough to hear. I left a wine glass in the bathtub, scattered tissues on the staircase. I stopped brushing my hair. I let the staff whisper. I let the cameras watch. Let them see the crazy widow unraveling. I even went into the garden barefoot one night and talked to Franklin's gravestone, loudly, tears real enough to sting my skin, anger sharp enough to draw blood from my own bitten tongue. But beneath it, I was planning. Every step I took in madness was a step closer to the truth. Because if they wanted a story, I'd give them one. I'd give them the role they wrote for me, word for word, until I rewrote the ending. And just when I started to settle into the performance, just when I was sure I had the upper hand, Kalen left a note on my vanity. 6 words. "You should stop digging, Heather." I never thought I'd be here, staring at a screen filled with recordings of my stepson's lies, watching his smirk twist and turn into something so hollow. Yet here I was, piecing together the puzzle they thought I wouldn't see. The first few days after I found the note, I didn't make any moves. I just waited, played my part. Kalen's smugness was enough of a sign. I needed to let him think I'd given up, that I was lost in the madness they had created for me. But all that was happening was my patience building, the pressure growing, the lies piling higher. And I was still climbing. I spent hours rehearsing. I'd stand in front of the bathroom mirror, pulling my hair out in chunks, forcing myself to tremble. Each time I practiced, I felt it, an anger simmering just below the surface, desperate to be set free. I had to let them think I was unraveling. Only then would I get my chance. One evening, after another quiet dinner with Kalen, I placed a glass of wine just slightly to the left, where I knew he'd be able to see it through the kitchen window. I made sure the light caught the edge of it just right, showing the slow, deliberate way I lifted it to my lips. "Kalen!" I called out softly. My voice was fragile, my words slurring. I heard him walk in from the hallway. He paused just for a moment in that doorway, watching, waiting. "What are you doing, Heather?" His voice was careful, too careful. I smiled, allowing the tremor in my hands to become visible. "Don't you think I deserve a drink, Kalen?" I asked, my voice just a little louder than necessary. He didn't respond, just stood there, looking at me with that cold, amused gaze. It felt like nothing more than an act to him, but it wasn't. I let the wine slip from my fingers, smashing onto the floor. The glass shattered, and I bent to pick it up, my fingers shaking even more than before. "Oops," I muttered, barely containing the smirk that crept up on me. Kalen didn't flinch, didn't react. He just stood there, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "Maybe you should rest, Heather," he finally said. "You've been through a lot." I nodded, the fake weariness I'd worked so hard to perfect weighing down my limbs. "Yeah, maybe I will." The moment he left the room, my real thoughts flooded back. He didn't know what I was capable of, or how far I was willing to go. Over the next few weeks, I ramped up my act. The breakdowns got more frequent, the forgetfulness more severe. Every time I made a mistake, I did it loudly. I laughed too long at a joke that wasn't funny. I stumbled over my words. The housekeeper saw it. The neighbors saw it. The cameras saw it. And most importantly, Kaylin saw it. But none of them had a clue that I was building something much worse than any of them could imagine. While I played my part, my allies worked in the shadows. Nakoa, the private investigator, had her hands full, but she was good. Too good. She got a hold of the cameras in Franklin's study. The footage was just what I needed. Kaylin, sitting in front of the camera, practicing his testimony with his best friend, laughing, mocking me. They hadn't realized the camera was on, the lens capturing every word, every movement. "That woman's a joke," Kaylin's voice echoed through the recording, clear and mocking. "She won't even remember what she signed. We're just going to play her like a violin." It was worse than I thought. They had planned this. I wasn't a victim to them. I was an object to be discarded. Then came the audio recordings. I had one of the cleaners pull the phone from Kaylin's office, and there, hidden in his drawer, was another treasure, his voice dripping with arrogance. "We've got her right where we want her," he said, laughing. "All we have to do is keep up the act. She'll fall apart soon enough. I can't wait to see her lose it." I had everything. Everything except the final piece. I knew there was a forger behind it all, the man who had altered Franklin's will, who'd given Kaylin what he wanted. Declan knew him, and Declan had made sure I'd get the signature, the affidavit, the paper trail. When Nakoa handed it over to me, sealed, signed, and sealed again, I felt the weight of it in my hands. Every word was a victory, but it wasn't enough yet. I needed the plan to be flawless. I needed them to see it coming, but never be able to stop it. I pulled every piece of evidence into one file. Then I set about creating the perfect presentation. I trimmed the footage, muted the unnecessary parts. A clean cut, no dramatic music, just the facts. The moment the will was altered, the moment they forged my signature, the moment they stole from me. Everything. I edited it into a seamless, courtroom-ready documentary of their betrayal. The trick wasn't in the revenge. It was getting them to help me build it. By the time I was done, the pieces were locked in place. I only needed the right moment. That moment came sooner than I expected. One night, just after dinner, Kaylin came to my room. He stood in the doorway, his face unreadable. "You're really doing this, aren't you?" he asked. His voice was calm, too calm, but I could see it in his eyes, the faintest flicker of fear. I smiled at him. "You'll see soon enough, Kaylin. You'll see everything." He didn't respond. He didn't need to, but I could tell by the look on his face that he knew I was ready. The trap was set. The air in the lawyer's office felt thick with tension. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears as I sat at the table, the cold, sterile atmosphere suffocating me. Everything about today was wrong. I was supposed to be the widow, a fragile, broken woman on the edge of a breakdown. They thought they had me figured out. They thought they'd won. Kaylin sat across from me, his usual smirk plastered across his face. He looked every bit the part of the golden boy, dressed in a tailored suit that screamed wealth and entitlement. His hair was perfectly in place, his posture immaculate. He had no idea what was coming. None at all. I could hear the lawyer clearing his throat, preparing to read the will again. I swallowed back the bile that rose in my throat. He started, but I wasn't listening. My mind was somewhere else, preparing for the moment I'd waited for, the moment I'd earned. The lawyer's voice droned on, his words familiar now. "As per Mr. Franklin's final wishes," He paused, glancing up at me briefly, then back at the paper in his hands. I was supposed to be unraveling by now. They expected me to be twitching, my hand shaking with nerves. But I wasn't. Not anymore. I let the silence stretch on for a moment. Kalen glanced at me, his eyes gleaming with confidence. He wasn't worried. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "Before we continue," I said softly, my voice colder than I'd ever intended. The room fell silent. Everyone turned their attention to me. The smug look on Kalen's face faltered for just a second, but he quickly recovered, folding his arms across his chest. "I'd like to show the room something." I stood slowly, my legs a little unsteady, but enough to make the room shift in the air. I reached into my bag and pulled out the small projector I'd prepared earlier. The lawyer raised an eyebrow, but I wasn't about to back down now. I plugged it in and waited for the room to darken. The screen flickered to life. I could feel Kalen's gaze boring into my back, but I kept my eyes focused on the projector. First came the footage, his mocking laughter filling the room. The room was so quiet, you could hear the breath of every person in it. There he was, sitting comfortably in his office chair, talking to a friend, completely unaware of the camera hidden in the corner. "That woman's a joke," he said, voice dripping with disdain. "She won't even remember what she signed. We're just going to play her like a violin." I didn't need to look at Kalen to know his face had drained of color. His smirk had completely disappeared, replaced by something darker. But I didn't stop. I wasn't finished yet. The next slide came up. It was a letter from my therapist, the real one, the one who had seen me before Franklin died. It contradicted everything they'd told the court. I let it linger on the screen, the words bold, undeniable. "Heather is not suffering from any mental instability. She is a competent individual who has shown remarkable strength in the face of loss." The air shifted again. I could feel the unease spreading like wildfire. The lawyer's hand shook as he flipped through the papers in front of him. He was starting to understand that this wasn't going the way he'd hoped. Then came the proof. The forged will. The original draft, with my name as the primary beneficiary, until it was changed, altered by someone with the intent to erase me. My fingers tightened into fists as I let the image of the forgery burn into their eyes. There was no denying it now. It was all right there in black and white. And last, the final piece, the footage of Kalen taking money from the business, withdrawing funds from accounts he had no right to access. The room felt colder now, as if everyone had collectively stopped breathing. I didn't need to say a word. The images spoke for me. I let the projector continue running, the silence growing deafening. Kalen's face, once so full of arrogant pride, was now drained. His eyes darted from the screen to the lawyer, then to me and back again. His jaw clenched, but he said nothing. He didn't have to. The truth was there, undeniable. I slowly turned off the projector and placed the remote on the table, my gaze never leaving Kalen's face. The lawyer was pale now, sweat beading on his forehead. I didn't look at him. I didn't need to. His panic wasn't what mattered. What mattered was the expression on Kalen's face, the way he was trying to maintain his composure, but failing. I stood, the room still heavy with the weight of the truth. I didn't shout. I didn't raise my voice. I simply walked away. I didn't need to stay and gloat. They all knew. They all saw what I had seen, and there was no going back. The door swung open, and I stepped out, leaving the chaos behind me. But I knew that this wasn't over. This was only the beginning. The days after the hearing were a blur of legal papers, phone calls, and quiet victories. I hadn't expected it to be easy. I hadn't expected anything to come quickly. But in the end, the truth wasn't just a weapon, it was a tidal wave. And Kalen was drowning in it. The fallout was swift and brutal. Declan had wasted no time. Charges were pressed for fraud and forgery. The moment the news broke, Kalen's once glossy reputation crumbled like a house of cards in a storm. He was stripped of everything, his inheritance, his position, his future. I watched from the sidelines, detached but satisfied. The public backlash was fierce. His name became a byword for dishonesty and betrayal. He was ostracized from every circle, every professional network. It didn't take long before he was jobless, scrambling for any semblance of stability. The life he had so carefully curated began to unravel, thread by thread. But the real victory, the one that felt like the purest form of justice, came when the estate was finally handed back to me. I sued for my rightful share, of course, but I wasn't content with just the money. I wanted more, and I got it, more than I ever thought I would. The mansion, Franklin's mansion, was no longer mine. Not that I wanted it. I sold it quickly, at a price that seemed almost obscene, but it wasn't about the money anymore. It was about control, about taking back what they had tried to steal from me. And when the deal was done, I used the proceeds to buy something that had been on my mind for months, a small beachside property in a quiet town. It wasn't for luxury. It wasn't to show off. It was for peace. I didn't need the grandeur of the mansion anymore. I didn't need to be the woman they tried to break. I just needed the quiet, the waves, the space to breathe. I walked barefoot along the beach that first morning, the cool sand sifting between my toes, the soft crash of the waves against the shore like a lullaby. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. They thought I'd fall apart, that the weight of everything would crush me. But I hadn't broken. I had only broken the silence. Weeks passed. I still thought about Kalen from time to time, but it was no longer with anger, just a hollow emptiness. He'd never been a part of my story, really. I'd just been too blind to see it. Let them call me crazy. Let them say I snapped. I didn't lose my mind. I used it. Quietly. Deliberately. I stood on the shore, watching the horizon where the ocean met the sky, the sun low and golden, and I felt the last of the tension leave my body. I could hear the faint murmur of distant voices in my mind, but they were fading like echoes. I turned back toward the house, a small smile tugging at my lips. I had a new life now, a new chapter, and this one I would write for myself. I paused and looked out at the ocean once more, the wind ruffling my hair. If someone tried to rewrite your story, would you play along? Or would you rewrite them out of it? The question lingered in the air like a challenge, and for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to answer.